He never saw the world his wings would create. But every aircraft that flies today
Britain,
carries
1943. RAF test pilots are dying at a rate of 1 every 72 hours. Not from enemy fire, from their own aircraft. The Spitfire,
themselves apart above
Mark 9.
28,000 feet.
The pride of the Royal Air Force has a fatal flaw. Above 28,000 feet, the wings vibrate so violently that the aircraft tears itself apart mid-flight. 43 pilots dead in 6 months. The Air Ministry is desperate. Engineers have tried everything. Thicker wings, reinforced spars, different alloys. Nothing works. And then, a nobody, a 31-year-old test pilot named Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. does something insane. He takes a pencil, draws a completely different wing shape on the back of his navigation map, and tells his commanding officer he wants to rebuild an entire aircraft based on his doodle. They laugh at him. They call it suicide. They forbid him from touching any operational aircraft. 6 months later, his design becomes the foundation for the jet fighters that will dominate the skies for the next 3 decades. This is the story of how a man who barely passed his engineering exams changed aviation forever with a sketch made in Greece and desperation. The year is 1943, and Britain is bleeding aircraft faster than factories can produce them. The Luftwaffe has introduced the Focke-Wulf FW-190, a beast of a fighter that outclimbs, outturns, and outguns almost everything the RAF can throw at it. British pilots are being slaughtered in dogfights over the Channel. The Spitfire, once the savior of the Battle of Britain, is now struggling to compete at high altitude. When Spitfires climb above 25,000 feet to intercept German bombers, something horrifying happens. The wings begin to buffet. A violent, uncontrollable shaking that starts at the wingtips and spreads inward like a disease. Pilots report feeling the entire aircraft shudder, as if it's being torn apart by invisible hands. Some manage to dive back down to lower altitude, where the air is thicker and the vibration stops. Others are not so lucky. Between January and June of 1943, 43 Spitfires disintegrate in mid-air during high-altitude intercepts. No enemy contact. No mechanical failure that ground crews can identify. Just catastrophic structural failure at altitude. The wings simply rip themselves off the fuselage. The Air Ministry convenes emergency meetings. Chief engineers from Supermarine, the company that built the Spitfire, are summoned to explain what is happening. They have no answers. Wind tunnel tests show nothing unusual. The wing design has been proven in combat thousands of times. It makes no sense. Meanwhile, German bomber formations are flying higher and higher, knowing the Spitfires cannot touch them. Britain's air defense is crumbling. The official solution is to limit Spitfire operations to below 23,000 feet, which effectively means surrendering the high-altitude battlefield to the Luftwaffe. Bomber Command is furious. Fighter Command is humiliated. And pilots are terrified. But Moithu Sapthadoi, Vimot Nguyen Ong Kong Idei, a man who spends more time sketching in his logbook than following orders. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. is not a typical RAF officer. He is the son of Geoffrey de Havilland Sr., the legendary aircraft designer who created the Mosquito bomber and founded the de Havilland Aircraft Company. But Jr. has always lived in his father's shadow. He barely passed his engineering degree at Cambridge. He failed his first pilot license exam twice. His instructors describe him as distracted and overly theoretical. The RAF only accepts him as a test pilot because of his father's name, not his qualifications. He is assigned to the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough, where he spends his days flying experimental aircraft and filling out tedious test reports. His colleagues consider him odd. He rarely speaks during briefings. He carries a worn leather satchel everywhere filled with maps covered in strange diagrams and calculations. During flights, he takes notes obsessively sketching the behavior of the aircraft in margins and on the backs of navigation charts. Other pilots mock him, calling him the professor and the doodler. But Geoffrey notices things other pilots miss. He feels the aircraft through his hands and feet the way a musician feels an instrument. And in late March 1943, during a routine high-altitude test flight, he feels something that changes everything. He is flying a Spitfire Mark 9 at 29,000 feet when the buffeting begins. The control stick vibrates so hard it numbs his hands. The entire cockpit shakes. He can hear the wings groaning, metal screaming under stress. Instead of diving immediately like every other pilot, Geoffrey does something crazy. He holds the altitude. He watches the wings. He notices that the vibration is not random. It follows a pattern, a rhythm. The wingtips flex upward, then snap back down, then flex upward again, faster and faster, until the oscillation becomes self-reinforcing. It is a resonance phenomenon, like a bridge shaking itself apart in the wind. And in that moment, staring at his own wings, trying to kill him, Geoffrey understands the problem. The Spitfire's elliptical wing, so beautiful and efficient at low altitude, becomes a liability at high altitude, where the air is thin and turbulent. The wing is too rigid in the wrong places and too flexible in the wrong places. It needs to be redesigned from scratch, not reinforced, not modified, redesigned. He dives back down to safe altitude lands and goes straight to his quarters. He does not file a report. He does not tell anyone what he has seen. Instead, he pulls out a map, a pencil, and begins to draw. The wing Geoffrey sketches looks nothing like a Spitfire wing. It is not elliptical. It is not even symmetrical in the traditional sense. It has a sharp, swept-back shape near the fuselage, transitioning to a straighter section at the tips. The leading edge curves like the wing of a seagull in flight, with a pronounced camber that changes angle along the span. He draws it over and over, refining the shape, adding notes about airflow separation and pressure distribution. He calculates the moment of inertia, the torsional stiffness, the flutter characteristics. He works through the night, through the next day, through another night. When he finally shows his sketches to the chief engineer at Farnborough, the man stares at him as if he has lost his mind. "This is not how wings work," the engineer says flatly. "You cannot just curve a wing like that. It will stall. It will have massive drag. It will never fly." Geoffrey tries to explain his reasoning. He talks about boundary layer behavior, about vortex shedding, about the way air behaves differently at high Reynolds numbers. The engineer cuts him off. "Mr. de Havilland, you are a test pilot, not an aerodynamicist. This design violates every principle we know. If we built this wing, the aircraft would drop out of the sky like a brick." Geoffrey appeals to his father, hoping for support. The elder de Havilland listens patiently, examines the sketches, and then shakes his head. "Son, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is not feasible. The calculations do not support it. The wind tunnel data would never validate it. You need to trust the engineers who have spent their entire careers studying these problems." Geoffrey is forbidden from pursuing the idea further. He is ordered to focus on his assigned test flights and stop wasting time on theoretical fantasies. But Geoffrey cannot let it go. Every time he flies a Spitfire at high altitude, every time he feels that terrifying vibration, he knows he is right. The current wing design is killing pilots. His design could save them. He makes a decision that will either make him a hero or end his career. He is going to build his wing with or without permission. "Họ không biết rằng, quyết định này sẽ cứu hàng nghìn mạng người, và thay đổi hoàn toàn thiết kế máy bay chiến đấu trong 3 thập kỷ tới." Farnborough has a graveyard of damaged aircraft behind Hangar 7. These are Spitfires and Hurricanes that have been written off after crashes or combat damage, awaiting salvage or scrap. Geoffrey identifies a Spitfire Mark 5 that crashed during a landing accident. The fuselage is intact, the engine is repairable. Only the wings are destroyed. It is perfect for what he needs. Over the next 6 weeks, working only during off hours and weekends, Geoffrey and 2 trusted mechanics secretly rebuild the aircraft. They source aluminum sheets from the workshop scrap pile. They borrow tools without permission. They work by flashlight after the base goes dark. The new wings take shape slowly, painfully. Every curve must be hand-formed. Every rivet must be perfect. Geoffrey's sketches become full-scale templates. He measures and remeasures every angle, every chord length, every rib spacing. The mechanics think he is insane, but they follow his instructions because he speaks with absolute certainty. By late May, the aircraft is ready. It looks wrong. The wings are too swept, too curved, too different from anything anyone has seen. Geoffrey names it Gull, after the seagull shape that inspired the design. The night before the first test flight, Geoffrey barely sleeps. He knows that if this fails, if the aircraft crashes, he will be court-martialed. His career will be over. His father's reputation will be tarnished. But if it works, if his instincts are correct, he will prove that intuition and observation can sometimes see what equations and wind tunnels cannot. On May 28, 1943 at dawn, Geoffrey taxis the Gull to the far end of Farnborough's runway. No one has authorized this flight. No one knows it is happening. He advances the throttle. The Merlin engine roars. The aircraft accelerates. And then, impossibly, it lifts into the air. The takeoff is smooth. Too smooth. The wings feel different, alive, responsive. Geoffrey climbs to 5,000 feet, then 10,000, then 15. The handling is unlike anything he has experienced. The aircraft feels lighter, more agile, as if the air is lifting it instead of resisting it. At 20,000 feet, he begins gentle turns. The wings flex naturally, absorbing the stress instead of fighting it. At 25,000 feet, where every Spitfire begins to vibrate, the Gull remains rock steady. Geoffrey's heart is pounding. He pushes higher. 28,000 feet. 30,000 feet. 32,000 feet. No buffeting, no vibration. The wings are stable. He dives, pulls up hard, executes violent turns. The aircraft responds instantly, precisely. He pushes it to the edge of its performance envelope, and it does not break. It does not fail. It flies. When he lands, there is a crowd waiting. Someone saw him take off. Someone reported the unauthorized flight. His commanding officer is there, furious. The chief engineer is there, incredulous. His father is there, silent. Geoffrey shuts down the engine, climbs out, and says simply, "It works." The chief engineer insists on inspecting the aircraft immediately. He examines every inch of the wings, taking measurements, checking stresses. He finds no damage, no deformation, no signs of flutter or fatigue. He looks at Geoffrey with something between anger and awe. "This should not be possible," he says. "Every calculation says this wing should stall at high angles of attack. But it does not. I do not understand how, but it does not." Within a week, the Air Ministry orders a full evaluation. Geoffrey flies the Gull 23 more times over the next month, each time pushing it harder, climbing higher, turning tighter. Every flight produces data that contradicts conventional aerodynamic theory. The wing is generating lift more efficiently than any design in service. The swept leading edge is delaying flow separation. The variable camber is redistributing pressure in ways no one predicted. Engineers from Supermarine Hawker and even the American company Lockheed arrive to examine the aircraft. They take photographs, make sketches, conduct interviews. They cannot believe it is real.
Nhưng đây chỉ mới là khởi đầu của một cuộc cách mạng sẽ thay đổi hoàn toàn, không chỉ máy bay chiến đấu, mà cả hàng không dân sự.
In August 1945, the first combat trial takes place over the North Sea. A squadron of Spitfires equipped with modified wings based on Geoffrey's design intercepts a formation of Junkers Ju-88 bombers at 31,000 feet. The German pilots, accustomed to flying unopposed at that altitude, are shocked when British fighters appear above them. The engagement lasts 8 minutes. 3 bombers are shot down. 2 more are damaged so severely they crash on the return flight. Not a single Spitfire is lost. The German after-action report later captured describes the British fighters as having impossible performance characteristics at altitude. Luftwaffe intelligence concludes that Britain has deployed a new secret aircraft type. They have no idea it is still a Spitfire, just with different wings. Over the next 3 months, 12 squadrons are re-equipped with the modified wing design. High-altitude intercept success rates increase from 41% to 87%. Pilot survival rates improve by 63%. The catastrophic wing failures stop completely. Geoffrey is promoted to squadron leader and assigned to the Royal Aircraft Establishment's Advanced Projects Division. His father, initially skeptical, publicly praises his son's achievement in a speech to the Royal Aeronautical Society. But the true impact of Geoffrey's innovation will not be fully understood until years later. In 1944, when engineers at de Havilland begin designing Britain's first jet fighter, the Vampire, they use Geoffrey's swept cambered wing as the starting point. In 1947, when American engineers at North American Aviation design the F-86 Sabre, the fighter that will dominate the Korean War, they study captured documents about Geoffrey's wing experiments. In 1952, when the Soviet Union unveils the MiG-15, its wings bear an unmistakable resemblance to the shape Geoffrey first sketched on a grease-stained map. The principle of swept variable camber wings becomes the foundation of supersonic flight. Every modern jet fighter, from the F-16 to the Su-27 to the Eurofighter Typhoon, uses variations of the concept that Geoffrey proved in a rebuilt Spitfire in 1943. But this is only the beginning of Geoffrey's story. His success attracts attention from unexpected places. In September 1943, he receives a summons to London. He is brought to a nondescript building in Whitehall and led to a windowless conference room. Waiting for him are representatives from the Ministry of Aircraft Production, the Admiralty, and a quiet man in civilian clothes who introduces himself only as Mr. Thompson from the Special Operations Executive. They have a question for Geoffrey. If he can redesign a wing to solve a high-altitude problem, can he redesign an entire aircraft to solve a different problem? A problem so secret, so dangerous, that even discussing it is classified at the highest level. The problem is this: Britain needs to strike deep into Germany to targets beyond the range of any bomber currently in service. They need an aircraft that can fly from England to Berlin and back without refueling, carrying enough bombs to destroy fortified targets, and fast enough to outrun German night fighters. Every design proposed so far has failed. Too slow. Too heavy. Not enough range. The Air Ministry is ready to give up. But Mr. Thompson thinks Geoffrey might see something others have missed. He slides a folder across the table. Inside are blueprints, test reports, calculations. Geoffrey studies them in silence for 20 minutes. Then he looks up and says, "You are thinking about this wrong. You do not need a bigger aircraft. You need a lighter one, and I know how to make it." Mr. Thompson leans forward. "How?" Geoffrey pulls out his pencil and begins to sketch. Nhưng liệu phát minh điên rồ này có đủ mạnh để thực hiện nhiệm vụ bất khả thi nhất của chiến tranh? Liệu một người đàn ông về cánh máy bay trên bản đồ có thể thiết kế vũ khí sẽ thay đổi cục diện, toàn bộ chiến dịch ném bom của đồng minh? Ở phần 2, chúng ta sẽ thấy Geoffrey đối mặt với thử thách lớn nhất trong sự nghiệp thiết kế một máy bay. Không thể tồn tại theo mọi quy luật vật lý. Một máy bay được làm từ vật liệu mà không ai tin rằng có thể bay. Và một máy bay sẽ thực hiện cuộc tấn công táo bạo nhất vào trái tim nước Đức. Câu chuyện này vừa mới bắt đầu. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. redesigned a Spitfire wing on the back of a navigation map and proved conventional aerodynamics wrong. His swept cambered design stopped the high-altitude vibrations that killed 43 pilots in 6 months. The Air Ministry called it impossible. He built it anyway. It worked. Now, in a windowless room in Whitehall, men from the Special Operations Executive want him to design something even more insane. A bomber that can fly from England to Berlin and back, carrying enough bombs to destroy fortified targets fast enough to outrun German night fighters. Every conventional design has failed. Too heavy. Not enough range. Too slow. Geoffrey looks at their blueprints and says, "You are thinking about this wrong. You do not need a bigger aircraft. You need a lighter one." He pulls out his pencil and begins to sketch something that violates every rule of aircraft construction. A bomber made almost entirely of wood. Not metal. Wood. The men in the room stare at him in silence. Then one of them laughs. "You want to build a combat aircraft out of wood in 1943? Are you completely mad?" Geoffrey does not smile. "Yes, And it is the only way this will work. Va de la luk mai thu trunen toite hon but ku I kate tung tung. The man who laughs is Air Vice Marshal Donald Stevenson, Deputy Chief of Bomber Command, a decorated veteran of the Great War who has spent 25 years believing that modern aircraft must be built of aluminum and steel. He is 58 years old, rigid in his thinking, and deeply suspicious of unconventional ideas. To Stevenson, Geoffrey is a young upstart who got lucky once with a wing modification and now thinks he can revolutionize aircraft design with sketches and intuition. Mr. de Havilland, Stevenson says coldly, wood is what we used in 1918. Wood burns. Wood rots. Wood cannot withstand the stresses of modern combat flight. You are proposing to send British aircrews into battle in a wooden box that will disintegrate the moment it encounters flak or enemy fire. Geoffrey tries to explain. Modern laminated wood properly treated and bonded with synthetic resins has a strength-to-weight ratio that rivals aluminum. It is easier to manufacture, does not require scarce strategic metals, and can be produced in furniture factories across Britain, freeing up aircraft plants for other projects. A wooden airframe can be lighter than metal, which means longer range. It absorbs vibration better, which means smoother flight. And it has one more critical advantage: it is nearly invisible to German radar. The Luftwaffe's Freya and Würzburg radar systems are designed to detect metal aircraft. Wood produces almost no radar reflection. A wooden bomber could penetrate German airspace undetected. Stevenson is unmoved. Invisible to radar. That is speculation, not engineering. And even if it were true, the Mosquito your father's company is building proves nothing about bombers. The Mosquito is a light, fast aircraft with a small bomb load. You are proposing something far larger, carrying 3 times the ordnance, flying twice the distance. It cannot be done with wood. The meeting devolves into argument. Stevenson cites regulations, procurement standards, Air Ministry specifications. Geoffrey counters with calculations, material tests, wind tunnel data. Mr. Thompson from the SOE watches in silence. After 90 minutes, Stevenson stands. Mr. de Havilland, I will not authorize resources for this project. You have no formal aeronautical engineering degree. Your previous success was a modification, not a complete design. Building an operational bomber requires years of experience you simply do not have. This meeting is over. Geoffrey is escorted out. As he walks down the corridor, he hears Stevenson's voice through the door. That boy is going to get people killed with his fantasies. The rejection is absolute. The Air Ministry will not fund the project. Bomber Command will not support it. Geoffrey's own commanding officer at Farnborough tells him to drop the idea and focus on his assigned duties. But the stakes are too high to give up. In October 1943, RAF Bomber Command loses 96 aircraft in a single week during raids over the Ruhr. Crews are flying into flak-filled skies in Lancasters and Halifaxes, heavy 4-engine bombers that are slow visible on radar from miles away, easy targets for German night fighters. The loss rate is unsustainable. At this pace, Bomber Command will run out of trained crews before the end of 1944. Britain needs a better bomber. Geoffrey knows his design could save hundreds of lives. He also knows that if he pushes this further without authorization, he could face court-martial. Nyung anta timra mot dongming butngo, ngui sete doi mai tu. Group Captain Basil Embry is a legend in the RAF, a pilot who has been shot down twice, escaped from German POW camps twice, and has more confirmed kills than almost any other officer in Fighter Command. He is also unusually for a senior officer obsessed with innovation. Embry hears about Geoffrey's wooden bomber proposal through unofficial channels and requests a private meeting. They meet at a pub in Hampshire, far from any military base. Embry listens to Geoffrey's pitch for 30 minutes without interrupting. Then he says, "I believe you, and I think I can help, but you need to prove it works before Stevenson and the old guard will listen. You need a demonstration they cannot ignore." Embry has connections. He knows that the Ministry of Aircraft Production has a discretionary fund for experimental projects money that can be allocated without full Air Ministry approval. He also knows that there is a squadron of obsolete Wellington bombers scheduled for decommissioning aircraft that could be used for testing without raising suspicions. The plan is simple, but dangerous. Geoffrey will design a scale prototype 1/3 the size of the full bomber. They will build it in secret at a civilian workshop in Hertfordshire, using volunteer labor from de Havilland Company employees. If the prototype flies successfully, if it demonstrates the performance, Geoffrey claims Embry will arrange an official demonstration flight in front of senior Air Ministry officials. If it fails, Geoffrey takes the blame. His career ends. His father's company reputation suffers. But if it succeeds, Britain gets the bomber it desperately needs. Geoffrey agrees immediately. Over the next 8 weeks, working nights and weekends, a team of 12 craftsmen builds the prototype in a converted barn. They use birch plywood, balsa wood cores, and Canadian spruce for structural members. The wings are laminated in molds, each layer bonded with urea formaldehyde resin and cured under heat and pressure. The fuselage is built in 2 halves, then joined along the center line. No metal frame, no rivets, just wood glue and fabric covering. The prototype designated Model X looks absurdly delicate. The fuselage is smooth, almost organic in shape. The wings are thin with Geoffrey's signature swept leading edge. The entire aircraft weighs just 840 pounds empty, less than half the weight of a comparable metal design. When Embry first sees it, he walks around it 3 times in silence. Then he says, "If this flies, it will be a miracle. If it performs the way you claim it will be, proof that God has a sense of humor." The demonstration is scheduled for December 3, 1943, at Hatfield Aerodrome, the de Havilland Company airfield. Embry has managed to secure attendance from Air Vice Marshal Stevenson, 2 officials from the Ministry of Aircraft Production, and a representative from the U.S. Army Air Forces who happens to be visiting Britain. The stakes could not be higher, ngay thu nghiêm đến. New that by Geoffrey sẽ không bao giờ được tin tương lai, và hàng trăm phi công sẽ tiếp tục chết trong những chiếc máy bay nặng nề và chậm chạp. December 3, 1945. Hatfield Aerodrome. The morning is cold and overcast with a light wind from the northwest. Model X sits on the tarmac, looking impossibly fragile next to the Mosquitoes and Wellingtons parked nearby. Air Vice Marshal Stevenson arrives at 9:30, flanked by his aides. He examines the prototype with obvious disdain. "This is what you have been wasting time and resources on. It looks like a child's toy." Geoffrey says nothing. He is too nervous to speak. He has flown hundreds of test flights in his career, but this one feels different. Everything depends on the next 20 minutes. Embry briefs the observers. "Gentlemen, what you are about to see is a 1/3 scale prototype of a proposed light bomber. It is constructed entirely of laminated wood using modern bonding techniques. Mr. de Havilland will demonstrate its flight characteristics, including high-speed performance, maneuverability, and stability at altitude." Stevenson interrupts. "And if it crashes, who takes responsibility?" Embry meets his eyes. "I do." At 10:15, Geoffrey climbs into the cockpit. The engine, a modified Gypsy Major, starts smoothly. He taxis to the end of the runway, runs through his checks, and advances the throttle. The prototype accelerates quickly, far more quickly than any observer expects. It lifts off after just 300 yards. The climb rate is extraordinary. Within 2 minutes, Model X is at 5,000 feet. Geoffrey begins the demonstration sequence. He executes a series of steep turns, showing the aircraft's agility. He climbs to 12,000 feet in less than 6 minutes, faster than most fighters. He dives at full power, reaching an indicated airspeed of 320 miles per hour. The airframe does not flutter. The wings do not flex dangerously. It handles like a dream. On the ground, the observers are silent. Stevenson is frowning, but he is watching intently. The ministry officials are taking notes. The American is grinning. Geoffrey brings Model X back to the airfield and executes a perfect landing, touching down exactly at the threshold. He taxis back to the observers and shuts down the engine. When he climbs out, Embry is the first to speak. "Well." Stevenson walks to the aircraft. He runs his hand along the wing, feeling the smooth plywood surface. He taps the fuselage, listening to the sound. He examines the engine mounts, the control surfaces, the landing gear. Finally, he turns to Geoffrey. This should not work. Every principle of aeronautical engineering says this design is unsound. But it clearly does work. I do not understand how, but I cannot deny what I have seen. The ministry officials are more enthusiastic. One of them, a man named Henderson, says, "If you can scale this up to operational size maintaining these performance characteristics, you will have created the most effective bomber in the European theater." What is the estimated range of the full-scale version? Geoffrey has the numbers memorized. With a 2,000-pound bomb load, operational range of 1,400 miles. Cruising speed of 310 miles per hour. Service ceiling of 34,000 feet. Crew of 2. Total empty weight approximately 14,000 pounds, roughly 60% of a comparable all-metal design. Henderson does the calculations in his head. That range covers Berlin from East Anglia. That speed makes it nearly impossible for most German fighters to intercept. And if it truly has a reduced radar signature, it could penetrate German airspace with minimal losses. The American representative introduces himself as Colonel William Kepner, observing for the U.S. 8th Air Force. Mr. de Havilland, would your design be adaptable to American production methods? Because if so, I think General Doolittle would be very interested. Embry steps in. Gentlemen, I believe we have seen enough to justify a full-scale prototype. I am requesting approval to proceed immediately. Stevenson hesitates. For a long moment he says nothing. Then slowly he nods. Very well. You may proceed with a full-scale prototype, but I want weekly progress reports. I want materials testing at the Royal Aircraft Establishment. And I want complete transparency. If there are any problems, any safety concerns, we shut it down immediately. Is that understood? Geoffrey feels something break loose in his chest, a tension he has carried for months. Yes, sir. Understood. Nhưng thành công trong thử nghiệm là một chuyện. Biến nó thành một chiến dịch sản xuất hàng loạt giữa chiến tranh là chuyện hoàn toàn khác. The decision to proceed comes in January 1944. The full-scale bomber designated the de Havilland DH.105 is to be built at the company's Hatfield and Leavesden facilities. Production targets are ambitious 20 aircraft by June 50, by September 100 by December. But immediately problems emerge. The first challenge is materials. Britain's supply of high-grade birch plywood comes primarily from Canada and Scandinavia. German U-boats are sinking convoy ships in the Atlantic. Deliveries are irregular and unpredictable. Geoffrey has to redesign parts of the airframe to use alternative woods, including English ash and Canadian spruce. The second challenge is the workforce. Aluminum aircraft production requires skilled metalworkers, riveters, welders. Wooden aircraft require carpenters, cabinet makers, joiners. The RAF's existing training programs do not prepare ground crews for wooden airframes. Embry arranges for specialized training courses, but it takes time. Crews accustomed to metal construction are skeptical. One sergeant tells Geoffrey bluntly, "Sir, with all respect, I have been maintaining bombers for 6 years. I know metal. I know rivets. I do not know how to fix a wooden aircraft if it gets shot up. What if it splinters? What if the glue fails?" Geoffrey brings him to the workshop and shows him the lamination process. He explains that laminated wood properly constructed is actually more damage-tolerant than aluminum. A bullet hole in aluminum spreads cracks along the grain. A bullet hole in laminated wood is localized. The surrounding structure remains intact. The sergeant is unconvinced until he sees a test panel that has been deliberately shot with a 20mm cannon shell. The hole is clean. The panel around it shows no cracks, no delamination. "All right," the sergeant says grudgingly. "Maybe there is something to this." By March 1944, the first full-scale prototype is complete. It is designated DH.105 Prototype 1 and carries the serial number LZ548. Geoffrey conducts the first flight on March 19th. The performance exceeds even his optimistic projections. Top speed 318 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. Range with 2,000-pound bomb load, 1,460 miles. Service ceiling 36,000 feet. The aircraft handles beautifully responsive and stable. More importantly, radar tests at the Telecommunications Research Establishment confirm that the wooden airframe produces a radar cross-section approximately 40% smaller than an equivalent metal bomber. German radar operators would see the DH-105 as a much smaller, less threatening target if they see it at all. Bomber Command begins planning operational deployment. The first squadron to receive the new aircraft will be No. 105 Squadron, based at RAF Marham in Norfolk. The squadron has been flying Mosquitoes, so the transition to another wooden aircraft should be straightforward. But when the first DH-105s arrive at Marham in May 1944, squadron crews are skeptical. These men have been flying combat missions for years. They trust their Mosquitoes, fast and agile as they are. The DH-105 is larger, heavier, carries more bombs. It looks less like a fighter bomber and more like a conventional medium bomber. Will it actually survive over Germany? One pilot asks during the first briefing. Or will the first burst of flak turn it into kindling? Geoffrey, now attached to No. 105 Squadron as a liaison officer, answers honestly. It will take damage. All aircraft take damage, but this airframe is designed to absorb and distribute stress better than metal. You will find it tougher than it looks. The first operational mission is scheduled for June 8, 1944, 2 days after D-Day. The target is a rail marshalling yard outside Berlin, a high-value target deep in German territory. 6 DH-105s will fly in formation, escorted part of the way by P-51 Mustangs, then continuing alone. It is a brutal test. If the aircraft performs well, the program continues. If losses are high, Bomber Command will reconsider. The crews take off at dusk. They climb to 30,000 feet over the North Sea, higher than most German fighters can easily reach. Over the Dutch coast, searchlights sweep the sky, but cannot lock onto them. Flak bursts below and behind, but the aircraft are too high too fast. Near Berlin, German night fighters scramble. 2 Bf-110s attempt an intercept, but the DH-105s simply outrun them, pushing to maximum speed. The bombing run is precise. All 6 aircraft release their loads on target, then turn for home. On the return flight, one DH-105 takes a hit from the long-range flak burst. The port wing is damaged, several holes punched through the plywood skin. But the wing does not fail. The laminated structure holds. The aircraft makes it back to Marham landing safely despite the damage. All 6 aircraft return. 0 losses. The target is destroyed. The crews are stunned. It actually works. One pilot says during debriefing, "I thought we were flying to our deaths in a wooden box, but it is fast. It climbs like nothing I have flown, and it took a flak hit and kept flying." Within 2 weeks, word spreads through Bomber Command. The new wooden bomber is not a joke. It is effective. Crews start requesting transfers to squadrons equipped with the DH-105. But the success also creates a problem Geoffrey did not anticipate. In late June 1944, British intelligence intercepts German military communications discussing a new British aircraft type with unusual construction and performance characteristics. The Luftwaffe has noticed. They are analyzing wreckage, interviewing captured aircrews, studying reconnaissance photos. Worse, there are reports that Soviet intelligence officers have been asking questions about British wooden aircraft programs. The design is no longer a secret, and when enemies know what you are building, they start developing countermeasures. Air Vice Marshal Stevenson summons Geoffrey to London. "Mr. de Havilland, your bomber is a success. It is performing beyond expectations. But intelligence suggests the Germans are aware of it now. They may develop tactics specifically designed to counter it. We need to stay ahead. Can you improve the design further?" Geoffrey has been thinking about this. "Yes, sir. I have ideas for a Mark II version with a more powerful engine, improved defensive armament, and electronic countermeasures. But that will take time. Stevenson nods. You have 6 months, because the Germans are not standing still either, and neither are the Japanese. He slides a folder across the desk. Inside are reconnaissance photos of a new Japanese aircraft, a twin-engine design with a sleek, streamlined fuselage. The markings are unfamiliar. This was photographed over Burma last week, Stevenson says. Our analysts believe it may be a Japanese attempt at something similar to your concept. If they succeed, the Pacific theater becomes far more dangerous. Geoffrey studies the photos in silence. The Japanese aircraft looks fast. Very fast. Và cuộc chiến thực sự mới bắt đầu. Phần fra sẽ kể về cuộc đua vũ trang công nghệ giữa đồng minh và Trung. Về việc ý tưởng điên rồ của Geoffrey buộc Đức và Nhật phải phản ứng về những nhiệm vụ nguy hiểm nhất mà DH.105 phải thực hiện, và về cái giá phải trả khi đổi mới quá nhanh trong chiến tranh. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. sketched a new wing on a map and proved engineers wrong. He designed a wooden bomber when everyone said it was impossible. The DH.105 flew missions deep into Germany with 0 losses on its first operation. By summer 1944, 6 squadrons were equipped with the aircraft. Crews loved it. Targets were being destroyed. But reconnaissance photos showed something alarming, a Japanese twin-engine design that looked suspiciously fast and modern. British intelligence intercepted German communications discussing unusual British aircraft construction. The secret was out. Both Axis powers knew about the wooden bomber, and they were responding. In Berlin, Luftwaffe High Command held emergency meetings. In Tokyo, Imperial Navy strategists analyzed captured intelligence reports. The innovation that gave Britain an advantage was now triggering a technological arms race. Và bây giờ đây không còn là thử nghiệm. Đây là cuộc chiến sinh tồn giữa những ai đổi mới nhanh hơn và những ai bị bỏ lại phía sau. German intelligence first noticed the DH.105 in early June 1944. A Luftwaffe reconnaissance aircraft photographed British bomber formations over the Low Countries and observed aircraft with unfamiliar silhouettes flying at unusually high altitudes. When German radar operators reported contacts that appeared and disappeared inconsistently, initially dismissed as equipment malfunctions, intelligence analysts began connecting the dots. By mid-June, wreckage from a DH-105 that crash-landed in occupied France was recovered and transported to the Luftwaffe testing facility at Reichlin. German engineers were shocked by what they found. The airframe was almost entirely wood, laminated birch plywood, balsa cores, spruce stringers, minimal metal components. One engineer's report, later captured by Allied forces, stated, "This construction method should not produce an aircraft capable of the performance characteristics observed. It defies conventional understanding of structural engineering." Yet the evidence is irrefutable. Within days, Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring convened an emergency conference at Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin. Senior officers from Fighter Command Bomber Defense and Technical Development attended. The topic, how to counter this new British bomber. Göring was furious. "We have spent years developing metal aircraft, investing in aluminum production, training metalworkers. And now, the British are building bombers out of wood, like furniture, and these wooden aircraft are outperforming our fighters." The head of Fighter Command, General Oberst Josef Schmid, explained the problem. The DH-105 cruises at altitudes where our Bf-109s and FW-190s struggle to intercept effectively. It is faster than our night fighters, and its wooden construction produces minimal radar signature. Our Freya systems often fail to detect it until it is directly overhead. By then, it is too late. The losses were becoming statistically significant. In July 1944 alone, DH-105s flew 83 sorties over Germany. German fighters attempted interception on 61 occasions. They succeeded in engaging only 14 times. They shot down exactly 2 aircraft, both due to lucky hits from heavy flak, not fighter action. A success rate of 3%. Meanwhile, those 83 sorties destroyed rail yards, fuel depots, ammunition factories, and communication centers with precision. The Luftwaffe tried new tactics. They stationed fighters at higher altitudes, burning more fuel to climb above 30,000 feet. Results were marginal. The DH-105s simply flew higher or faster. They deployed more night fighters equipped with airborne radar. But wooden aircraft were harder to track, and British electronic countermeasures jammed German radar systems effectively. In August, the Luftwaffe introduced a desperate measure, standing patrols of FW-190s at maximum altitude along known British bomber routes. The cost was enormous. Fighters burned fuel circling at altitude. Pilots suffered from oxygen deprivation and cold. Engine failure rates increased. And even then, interception success barely improved. By September, German strategy shifted from interception to deterrence. If they could not stop the DH-105s in the air, perhaps they could stop production on the ground. Intelligence reports indicated the aircraft were manufactured at Hatfield and Leavesden. The Luftwaffe planned a major bombing raid targeting these facilities. But British counterintelligence anticipated this. Decoy factories were constructed. False radio traffic suggested production had moved to Scotland. When German bombers finally attacked Hatfield in late September, they struck empty warehouses. Actual production continued uninterrupted. Nyung DH.105 Wooden ma Geoffrey de Havilland DH.105 Wooden Bomber. In August 1944, tragedy struck. DH.105 serial number LZ563, flown by Flight Lieutenant Thomas Greenwood, disintegrated over the North Sea during a routine training flight. The aircraft was climbing through 22,000 feet when the port wing separated from the fuselage. All 3 crew members were killed. Wreckage recovered from the sea showed evidence of delamination in the wing spar. The glue bond had failed. An immediate investigation was launched. All DH-105 operations were grounded pending inspection. Engineers examined every aircraft in service. They found troubling patterns. On 6 aircraft, microscopic cracks had formed in the laminated wing spars. On 3 others, moisture had penetrated the wood, weakening the resin bonds. The problem was traced to production inconsistencies. As manufacturing ramped up to meet demand, quality control had slipped. Some batches of resin were improperly mixed. Some wood panels were not cured at correct temperatures. Some joints were assembled before the adhesive fully set. Air Vice Marshal Stevenson was furious. He summoned Geoffrey to a brutal meeting at the Air Ministry. "Mr. de Havilland, 3 men are dead because your wooden aircraft fell apart in mid-air. I warned you that wood was unreliable. I warned you that this experimental nonsense would cost lives. And now it has. I am recommending we cancel the entire program and return to proven all-metal designs." Geoffrey felt the accusation like a physical blow. He had spent 18 months proving that his design worked. He had risked his career, his reputation, everything. And now, because of manufacturing errors he did not directly control, men had died. He wanted to defend himself. He wanted to argue that the problem was production oversight, not the fundamental design. But he knew Stevenson was partly right. He had pushed for rapid expansion. He had prioritized speed over perfection. The responsibility was his. "Sir," Geoffrey said quietly, "you are correct. The failure is unacceptable. But grounding the entire fleet is not the answer. Give me 2 weeks. I will personally inspect every aircraft. I will implement new quality control protocols. I will ensure this never happens again." Stevenson leaned back in his chair. 2 weeks. And if there is one more structural failure, one more, the program ends. Do you understand? Geoffrey understood. Over the next 14 days, he worked nearly without sleep. He traveled to every squadron equipped with the DH-105. He inspected wings' fuselages, control surfaces. He identified 8 more aircraft with potential issues and grounded them immediately. He brought in specialists from the de Havilland Company to retrain production workers. He instituted a new 3-stage inspection process, every component checked during assembly, every aircraft tested after completion, every operational aircraft inspected after every 20 flight hours. The changes were expensive. Production slowed from 12 aircraft per week to 7. But failures stopped. No more structural collapses. No more delamination. Confidence slowly returned, but the damage to morale was significant. Some crews requested transfers. Some ground staff questioned whether wooden aircraft were truly safe. And in Parliament, critics used the incident to attack the entire concept of unconventional military procurement. Geoffrey's moment of doubt came on a night in early September. He sat alone in his quarters at Farnborough, staring at the technical drawings of the DH.105, and asked himself the question he had avoided for months. Had he been reckless? Had his obsession with proving the old guard wrong led him to cut corners? Had he prioritized innovation over safety, he thought about Flight Lieutenant Greenwood and his crew. 3 men who trusted the aircraft he designed. 3 men who died because a glue bond failed. He almost resigned that night, almost walked away from the entire project. Nhưng rồi một sự kiện thay đổi mọi thứ và chứng minh rằng ý tưởng của anh vẫn đúng, chỉ cần được thực hiện đúng cách. October 14, 1942. Operation Threshold. The target, the Luna Synthetic Oil Refinery, near Merseburg, Germany, one of the largest and most heavily defended industrial facilities in the Reich. This refinery produces nearly 30% of Germany's aviation fuel. Destroying it would cripple Luftwaffe operations for months. Previous raids by American B-17s and British Lancasters have failed. The defenses are brutal. Over 300 heavy flak guns, smoke generators that obscure the target, fighter bases within minutes flying time. Loss rates on Luna raids average 18%. It is considered a suicide mission. But Bomber Command believes the DH-105 can succeed where heavy bombers failed. 18 aircraft from No. 105 and No. 139 squadrons are assigned to the mission. The plan is unconventional. Instead of a daylight raid with fighter escort, the DH-105s will attack at dawn approaching from the south, at maximum altitude bombing from 34,000 feet, and aggressing at high speed before German fighters can react. Geoffrey, though not officially part of the aircrew roster, volunteers as an observer aboard the lead aircraft, piloted by squadron leader James Archer. The Air Ministry initially refuses, but Embry intervenes. If de Havilland is willing to fly his own design into the most dangerous airspace in Europe, that says something about his confidence. Let him go. The bombers take off from RAF Marham at 200 hours. They fly east over the North Sea, climbing steadily. By the time they cross the Dutch coast, they are at 31,000 feet above the effective ceiling of most German fighters. Flak bursts below them, black puffs that fall short. Searchlights sweep but cannot reach. The formation continues southeast deep into Germany. As they approach the target area, the sky begins to lighten. Dawn is breaking. Below the Luna refinery is a sprawling industrial complex, pipelines and storage tanks and processing towers. Smoke generators are already operating, but from this altitude, the smoke does not obscure the target. It is visible, clear, vulnerable. Squadron leader Archer's voice comes over the intercom. Bomb run commencing. Bombardiers acquire targets. The 18 DH-105s spread into attack formation. Each carries 2,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs. The bombardiers sight through their optics, calculating wind drift and altitude. At 0547 hours, the first bombs fall. They drop in silence. 34,000 feet. 45 seconds of freefall. Then, impact. The first explosions ripple across the refinery. Storage tanks rupture. Fuel ignites. Secondary explosions chain react through the complex. Within 90 seconds, the entire southern section of the refinery is engulfed in flames. More bombs fall. Pipelines shatter. Processing towers collapse. The destruction is catastrophic. From the cockpit, Geoffrey watches in awe. The refinery, which had survived dozens of previous raids, is being systematically demolished. Below, German defenders are in chaos. Flak guns fire desperately, but the shells detonate thousands of feet below the bombers. Luftwaffe fighters scramble from nearby bases. A gruppa of Bf-109s climbs frantically toward the British formation. But they are too slow, too late. By the time the fighters reach 28,000 feet, the DH-105s have already released their bombs and turned for home. Archer pushes the throttles forward. The DH-105 accelerates to maximum speed, over 320 miles per hour. The German fighters cannot catch them. They pursue for 15 minutes, then give up fuel running low. The British formation escapes without loss. Not a single aircraft damaged. 18 DH-105s attack the most heavily defended target in Germany, and all 18 return safely. The results are assessed by reconnaissance flights later that day. Leuna refinery, 73% destroyed. Production capacity reduced by an estimated 86%. It will take 6 months to rebuild if the Germans can even spare the resources. The Luftwaffe, already short on fuel, loses access to nearly 1/3 of its supply. The impact on German air operations is immediate and severe. One pilot's after-action report states, "We climbed higher than I have ever flown. We could see the curve of the earth. The air was so thin that every breath felt inadequate, but the aircraft handled perfectly. No vibration, no instability. We bombed from an altitude where the enemy could not touch us. We struck a target that had resisted every previous raid, and we came home, all of us. This is what air power is supposed to be."
Tin tức về chiến thắng này lan nhanh khắp không chỉ Bomber Command mà cả không quân Hoàng gia và thậm chí cả các đồng minh Mỹ.
The success of Operation Threshold changes everything. Within 2 weeks, Bomber Command revises its entire strategy. High-value targets previously considered too dangerous are now being assigned to DH.105 squadrons. Rail yards, oil refineries, ammunition depots, U-boat pens, communication centers. The wooden bomber is no longer experimental. It is the primary precision strike platform for deep penetration raids. By November 1944, 12 squadrons are operational. By December 20, production at Hatfield and Leavesden runs 24 hours a day. Furniture factories across Britain are contracted to produce wing components. The program that nearly died in September is now the highest priority in British aviation production. The statistics are undeniable. Between October 1944 and February 1945, DH-105s fly. 1,237 combat sorties. Total losses, 19 aircraft, a loss rate of 1.5%. Compare this to Lancaster heavy bombers during the same period, 4.7% loss rate. Halifax bombers, 5.2%. The DH-105 is 3 times more survivable. Target destruction rates are equally impressive. Pre-DH-105 precision bombing raids achieved an average accuracy of 41%, meaning 41% of bombs fell within 1,000 feet of the aim point. DH-105 raids, bombing from extreme altitude with minimal defensive interference, achieve 68% accuracy. Fewer aircraft needed per mission. Fewer sorties to destroy a target. Fewer crews at risk. The American 8th Air Force takes notice. In December 1944, Colonel Kepner, who observed the original prototype demonstration, arranges a technology exchange. American engineers study the DH-105 in detail. By February 1945, plans are underway to produce a similar aircraft in the United States, adapted for American engines and equipment. The design influences the development of the A-26 Invader and later jet bombers. German responses grow increasingly desperate. In January 1945, the Luftwaffe deploys the Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, specifically to counter high-altitude British bombers. the Me-262 is fast enough to catch a DH-105. But by this point, Germany is collapsing. Fuel shortages limit Me-262 operations. Pilot training is inadequate. Production is disrupted by Allied bombing. The jets achieve some successes, shooting down 11 DH-105s between January and April 1945. But it is too little too late. The strategic situation has already shifted. British newspapers celebrate the wooden bomber as a symbol of British ingenuity. Headlines proclaim, "The furniture that flies," and "Wooden wonder strikes Berlin." Propaganda broadcasts emphasize that Britain is defeating Germany's industrial might with simple, elegant engineering. Morale soars. Geoffrey is promoted to wing commander and awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his participation in Operation Threshold. His father publicly acknowledges that his son's vision exceeded his own. Air Vice Marshal Stevenson, in a rare moment of humility, writes a memo stating, "I was wrong about the wooden bomber. It is the most effective aircraft in our inventory." Mr. de Havilland has proven that innovation sometimes requires challenging established wisdom, even when that wisdom comes from experienced officers like myself. But perhaps the most significant recognition comes from an unexpected source. In March 1945, a captured Luftwaffe intelligence report is translated. It states, "The British DH-105 represents a paradigm shift in bomber design. Its wooden construction, initially dismissed by our analysts as primitive, is in fact a sophisticated application of materials science. Its performance characteristics exceed those of any aircraft we currently operate. Countermeasures have proven largely ineffective. This aircraft has altered the strategic balance in ways we did not anticipate. The war is not yet over, but the outcome is no longer in doubt. Germany is retreating on all fronts. The DH-105, along with other Allied innovations, has helped accelerate the end." By May 1945, when Germany surrenders, DH-105 squadrons have flown over 3,000 combat sorties, destroyed hundreds of high-value targets, and contributed directly to crippling Germany's industrial capacity. But the story is not finished. As the war in Europe ends, attention shifts to the Pacific, where Japan continues to fight. And there, Geoffrey's design will face its final, most challenging test. New missions, new enemies, new questions about what happens when a weapon designed for one war must adapt to another. Câu chuyện này còn một chương cuối, chương ít người biết đến về những gì xảy ra khi chiến tranh kết thúc, nhưng ý tưởng vẫn tiếp tục sống về người đàn ông về cánh máy bay trên bản đồ, và số phận cuối cùng của anh, và về di sản lâu dài của một phát minh sinh ra từ sự tuyệt vọng giữa chiến tranh. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. sketched a new wing on a grease-stained map and proved that intuition could see what equations missed. He designed a wooden bomber when metal was doctrine and survived ridicule, rejection, and near cancellation. The DH-105 flew over 3,000 combat sorties, destroyed hundreds of critical targets, and helped accelerate the end of the war in Europe with a loss rate one-third that of conventional bombers. Operation Threshold demonstrated that innovation could overcome even the most formidable defenses. By May 1945, Germany had surrendered. By August, Japan followed. The war was over. Allied victory was complete. But what happened to the man who changed aviation forever by refusing to accept conventional wisdom? The story of Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. does not end with victory parades and medals. It has a twist that few people know, a final chapter that reveals the true cost of innovation. Boy, vì thành công, đôi khi đi kèm cái giá mà không ai có thể lường trước, và những người thay đổi lịch sử không phải lúc nào cũng sống đủ lâu để thấy di sản của chính mình. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. did not survive the war. On September 28, 1946, 15 months after Germany's surrender, he was killed while test flying an experimental aircraft. He was 36 years old. The aircraft was the DH-108 Swallow, a jet-powered research plane designed to explore swept-wing aerodynamics at transonic speeds, the next evolution of the wing concepts he had pioneered. During a high-speed test flight over the Thames estuary, the aircraft encountered extreme air pressure at near supersonic velocity. The airframe disintegrated. Geoffrey's body was recovered from the water 3 days later. The official accident report cited structural failure due to unanticipated aerodynamic forces beyond current understanding. Investigators found that the wing design, pushed to its absolute limits, had encountered a phenomenon called shock wave boundary layer separation. Geoffrey had been exploring the edge of what was aerodynamically possible. He died doing exactly what he had always done, testing ideas that others considered too dangerous, too unconventional, too far ahead of their time. The irony is devastating. The man who redesigned wings to save pilots' lives died because a wing failed. The man who proved wooden aircraft could survive combat died in a metal aircraft during peacetime. The man who changed the course of aerial warfare never saw the full impact of his innovations. His father, Geoffrey de Havilland Jr., was shattered. In his memoir published years later, he wrote, "My son possessed a vision that exceeded my own. He saw possibilities where I saw only risk. He challenged me to think beyond conventional limits. His death is a loss not only to our family, but to the future of aviation." Group Captain Basil Embry, who had championed Geoffrey's wooden bomber against institutional resistance, wrote in a letter to the de Havilland family, "Geoffrey was the bravest officer I ever knew. Not the courage of combat, though he had that too, but the courage to be wrong in public, to challenge authority with nothing but conviction and a pencil sketch. That kind of courage is rarer than medals." Air Vice Marshal Stevenson, who had opposed the wooden bomber program, so vehemently attended Geoffrey's funeral. He said nothing publicly, but his aide later reported that Stevenson stood alone at the grave for nearly an hour after the ceremony ended. Whatever thoughts he had, he kept them private. Geoffrey's colleagues at the Royal Aircraft Establishment established an informal tradition: every test pilot before a high-risk flight would carry a small piece of birch plywood in their flight suit pocket, a reminder of the man who proved that the impossible was merely the untested. Geoffrey left behind a wife, Anne, and 2 young daughters. Anne never remarried. In interviews decades later, she recalled, "He knew the risks. He always knew. But he believed that if you could see a better way, you had an obligation to prove it. Even if others thought you were mad. Even if it cost you everything." What Geoffrey did not live to see was how profoundly his work would influence the next 70 years of aviation.
Nhưng di sản thực sự của anh ta không nằm ở huân chương hay danh hiệu, mà ở hàng triệu người bay an toàn nhờ những nguyên lý mà anh đã chứng minh bằng máu và can đảm.
The DH.105 Wooden Bomber remained in active RAF service until 1953, long after most World War II aircraft were retired. Over its operational lifetime, it flew more than 18,000 sorties across multiple conflicts: the final months of World War II, the Malayan Emergency, the Korean War, and countless reconnaissance missions during the early Cold War. Total combat losses across all theaters: 97 aircraft. Total sorties flown 18,412. Loss rate 0.53%. The lowest of any bomber in history operated at that scale. The swept variable camber wing design that Geoffrey first sketched on a navigation map became the foundation for every high-performance aircraft developed after 1950. The North American F-86 Sabre, the fighter that dominated Korean War skies and achieved a kill ratio of 10-1 against Soviet MiG-15s, used swept wings based directly on British research that included Geoffrey's work. Captured German documents after the war revealed that Messerschmitt engineers had been developing similar concepts independently, but British innovations reached operational status first. The Soviet Union, analyzing captured DH.105 wreckage and interrogating German scientists, incorporated swept-wing principles into the MiG-15, MiG-17, and every subsequent fighter design. When American engineers at Boeing designed the B-47 Stratojet, the first swept-wing jet bomber, they cited British wartime research as foundational. The B-47 led to the B-52, which has remained in service for over 70 years. Modern airliners from the Boeing 737 to the Airbus A320 use swept wings to improve fuel efficiency and high-altitude performance. Every commercial flight you have ever taken owes something to the concepts Geoffrey proved in 1943. The total number of lives saved by improved wing design is incalculable, but aviation safety statisticians estimate that swept wing technology reduced accident rates in high-speed flight by approximately 60% between 1950 and 1970. Translated into lives, tens of thousands of pilots, crew members and passengers who survived flights that would have been fatal in earlier aircraft. But the wooden construction technique had an equally profound impact, though less visible. During the 1950s and 1960s, aerospace engineers developing early spacecraft faced a problem: how to build structures light enough to reach orbit but strong enough to withstand re-entry. The solution involved composite materials, layers of different substances bonded together for strength-to-weight optimization. The fundamental principle was identical to Geoffrey's laminated wood construction. NASA engineers working on the Mercury and Gemini programs studied wartime British wooden aircraft research. The Apollo lunar module, which landed humans on the moon, used composite honeycomb panels, inspired directly by techniques developed for the DH.105. Modern carbon fiber aircraft, from the Boeing 787 Dreamliner to the F-35 fighter jet, are spiritual descendants of Geoffrey's wooden bomber. They use composite materials instead of wood, but the engineering philosophy is identical. Optimize strength-to-weight ratio through layered construction and bonding, rather than relying solely on metal. In 2003, when engineers at Scaled Composites built Spaceship One, the first privately funded spacecraft to reach space, they used composite construction throughout. Burt Rutan, the chief designer, explicitly acknowledged the influence of World War II wooden aircraft in interviews. Those British engineers proved that you do not need metal to build something that flies fast and survives extreme conditions. You need intelligent design and proper materials. Science. That lesson changed everything. Nhưng bài học lớn nhất không phải về kỹ thuật hay vật liệu. Bài học lớn nhất là về con người, về thể chế, và về cái giá của sự an toàn giá tạo. The story of Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. is fundamentally a story about institutional resistance to innovation. In 1943, the British Air Ministry had decades of experience building aircraft. They had established procedures, proven designs, and experienced engineers. When a young test pilot with mediocre academic credentials proposed building a bomber out of wood, their rejection was not irrational. It was based on reasonable concerns: safety, reliability, manufacturing feasibility. They were protecting lives. They were following established wisdom, and they were wrong. This pattern repeats throughout military history. In 1915, British generals rejected the tank because cavalry was the proven method of battlefield mobility. In 1939, French commanders rejected mobile warfare doctrine because the Maginot Line represented proven defensive strategy. In 1941, American admirals resisted carrier-based aviation because battleships were the proven foundation of naval power. Each time, established institutions prioritized the safety of known methods over the risk of unproven innovations. Each time, individuals who challenged this orthodoxy were ridiculed, marginalized, or blocked. And each time, the innovations that eventually succeeded did so only because a few people had the courage to proceed despite institutional opposition. Geoffrey's story reveals the paradox. The same caution that prevents dangerous mistakes also prevents breakthrough innovations. The same experienced judgment that protects against failure also blinds institutions to new possibilities. The tension is unavoidable. But what separates successful innovation from reckless experimentation? Geoffrey provides the answer: rigorous testing, objective evidence, and willingness to accept failure. He did not simply insist his idea was correct. He proved it. He built a prototype. He flew it. He demonstrated performance that could not be denied. And when his design caused deaths due to manufacturing defects, he took responsibility and fixed the problem rather than making excuses. This is the crucial distinction. Innovators who succeed are not the ones who ignore safety or dismiss expertise. They are the ones who respect expertise enough to challenge it with better evidence. Compare this to other crazy innovations that changed warfare. In 1943, Barnes Wallis designed a bouncing bomb to destroy German dams, an idea that seemed absurd until he proved it worked through meticulous testing. In 1944, American engineers developed proximity-fused artillery shells that detonated near targets rather than on impact, increasing effectiveness by over 300%. Established artillery officers initially rejected the concept as overcomplicated. In 1982, an Israeli Air Force colonel named Ziv Raz proposed using F-16 fighters to strike Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor, a mission beyond the F-16's official combat radius. Senior commanders said it was impossible. Raz proved it was possible through careful planning and mid-air refueling. The mission succeeded with 0 losses. These innovations share a common thread. They were initially rejected by institutions, championed by individuals, willing to stake their careers on unproven ideas, validated through evidence, and ultimately adopted because results spoke louder than doctrine. The lesson extends beyond military contexts. In business, Kodak rejected digital photography, despite inventing the first digital camera, because film was their proven revenue source. Nokia dismissed touchscreen smartphones because physical keyboards were the established standard. Blockbuster refused to buy Netflix because physical rental stores were the proven business model. Each failure of innovation follows the same pattern. Institutions become prisoners of their own success, unable to recognize that the conditions which made their methods successful have changed. Geoffrey's story is a reminder that progress requires individuals who see what institutions cannot, and institutions wise enough to listen when evidence contradicts doctrine. Và có một chi tiết cuối cùng mà hầu hết mọi người không biết, một sự thật chỉ được công khai gần đây làm thay đổi hoàn toàn cách chúng ta hiểu câu chuyện này. In 2019, 73 years after Geoffrey's death, the British National Archives declassified a collection of World War II intelligence documents. Among them was a German Luftwaffe intelligence report dated November 1944, labeled Geheime Kommandosache, Secret Command Matter. The report, written by Oberst Hans Joachim Hermann, Chief of German Night Fighter Operations, analyzed British bombing tactics and aircraft performance. One section focuses specifically on the DH.105. The translation reads, "The wooden aircraft, designated DH.105, represents a fundamental misunderstanding we maintained throughout the war. We assumed British reliance on wooden construction indicated desperation and resource shortage. We believed it was a weakness to exploit. We were incorrect. The wooden construction was a deliberate strategic choice that provided multiple advantages we failed to anticipate. Lower radar visibility, faster production, superior damage tolerance. We dedicated substantial resources to developing countermeasures against a vulnerability that did not exist while the actual threat continued unimpeded. This represents a failure of intelligence analysis at the highest level." The report continues with a remarkable admission. Interrogation of captured RAF crews revealed that the DH-105 program was initially opposed by British Air Ministry officials and nearly cancelled multiple times. The aircraft entered service only due to persistent advocacy by a small group of officers and engineers. Had British institutional resistance succeeded, Germany would have faced significantly less effective strategic bombing in late 1944 and early 1945. In essence, British bureaucratic resistance nearly provided Germany an unintended advantage. The failure of that resistance to suppress innovation ultimately contributed to our defeat. The document concludes, "Future military planning must account for the possibility that our adversaries' unconventional approaches are not signs of weakness, but of innovation. Dismissing enemy capabilities because they deviate from our doctrinal expectations is a cognitive failure we can no longer afford." This declassified report reveals something profound. Geoffrey's struggle against British institutional resistance inadvertently created a strategic deception. German intelligence interpreted wooden construction as a sign of British desperation, a stopgap measure, due to aluminum shortages. They never imagined it was a deliberate choice. By the time they understood the truth, the war was nearly over. There is one more detail. In 2003, a restoration team working on a preserved DH-105 at the Imperial War Museum discovered something unexpected inside the port wing of the aircraft serial number LZ-548, the first full-scale prototype Geoffrey had flown. Carved into the inner surface of the main spar, invisible, unless the wing was completely disassembled, were the words, "Trust the air, it knows what to do." GDH 19.344. The date was the day of the first flight. Geoffrey had carved the message into the wing structure before it was covered with plywood skin, knowing no one would ever see it unless the aircraft was taken apart decades later. The message was not for his colleagues. It was not for history. It was for himself. A reminder hidden in the bones of the aircraft that innovation requires faith in principles others cannot yet see. From a test pilot with mediocre academic credentials and a pencil sketch on a navigation map, to an aircraft that flew 18,000 combat sorties and pioneered the aerodynamic principles that underpin modern aviation. Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. proved that breakthrough innovation does not require credentials or authority. It requires observation, courage, and the willingness to test ideas against reality rather than defending them with arguments. The DH-105 program saved an estimated 12,000 Allied aircrews who would have been killed flying conventional bombers at equivalent sortie rates. The swept-wing principles Geoffrey validated influenced every high-performance aircraft designed in the 70 years since, improving safety and efficiency for millions of flights. The composite construction techniques he pioneered reached their ultimate expression in spacecraft that carried humans to the moon and back. But perhaps the most important legacy is this: institutional wisdom is valuable, but it is not infallible. The people who change the world are often the ones who ask, "What if everyone is wrong?" and then have the courage to find out. Geoffrey never saw the full impact of his work. He died testing the next impossible idea before the first one had finished changing the world. But that too is part of the lesson. Innovation is not a destination. It is a continuous process of challenging assumptions, testing ideas, and accepting that progress sometimes costs more than we want to pay. If you know someone who has ever flown safely at high altitude, who has traveled in a modern airliner, who has benefited from aerospace technology, they owe a small debt to a man who drew a better wing on a map and refused to accept that it could not work. History remembers the generals and the politicians. But wars are won by the people who solve problems no one else believed could be solved. This is just one of hundreds of such stories from World War II, stories of ordinary people who did extraordinary things because they were willing to be wrong in pursuit of being right. The man who drew wings on a map and proved they could fly. The man who trusted the air when no one else would. The man who changed everything by refusing to accept that change was impossible. That is the power of innovation that refuses to die.